Welcome to the session where we'll be discussing something very interesting. We call it responsible investment in land. And also, we'll be discussing with that context some global framework and guidelines. So, what is this responsive investment in land? So, land, though it has many facets, like land is also very emotional entity for us, cultural identity. Like many people have their own village name embedded in their land, in their name. So many people take pride in talking about their own village, from the place they come from, and they are willing to sacrifice their life for the land. We call fatherland, motherland. So land is has different connotations. It is a cultural identity. It is history for some people, ecological entity for some people. But increasingly, land is being seen as a economic entity, an asset for financialization, for land market. So increasingly, land is being looked at as something where we can invest, where as a individual we can park our money and appreciate, and the value will appreciate land and housing particularly. In India, we talk about almost 85% of our wealth is in land and housing in India. And there is now a discussion around how to unlock it by mortgaging, mortgage-based finance, mortgage-based securities. But at the same time, we see, particularly post, while there was post independence, there was a call for equitable land distribution, land reform, giving land to tillers, giving land to landless, giving land to Dalits, tribal women. But post liberalization, 90s, we have been looking at land for more competitive use. Like if land is used for agriculture, it is less competitive. It's for industry, it's more competitive. For urbanization, very highly competitive. So now land is being seen in terms of land price. If land is at Nariman Point, very costly. If land is in tribal areas, less costly. So when we look at land, a land for most competitive use, what we are seeing, there is a increasing competition around land for urbanization, for industrialization, for housing, and more of late, since last few years, for climate solutions, for renewable energy investment, solar parks. So what is happening? When we put land for more competitive use, we replace the earlier use, the for which land was earlier used, and we also replace the user. For example, if agriculture land is going for industry, so land usually change from agriculture industry. The farmer will no longer be holding the land. Some other people will be holding the land. So what happened in the process? We try to see that the people who are earlier users or earlier users are changing, and we provide them some compensation. We go for land acquisition. So there has been land acquisition, compensation, resettlement, rehabilitation. But always when land use changes, there is a cost added to this. There could be conflict, there could be social and environmental cost attached to it. So always we have seen many cases where people are not willing to give their land. Recently, we are seeing the farmer protest happening in Noida, where farmers are talking about that our land was taken at this price. After 20 years, we are not given any no, compensation, but now the price has gone up, so we have to give a compensation at the new price. So there are a lot of, if you look at newspaper daily, you find a lot of conflicts around land. So where people contest the way land is priced, people contest the land is put into alternative use or new use or more competitive use. Because always we replace someone's interest and other interest take over. For example, in urban areas we see gentrification, where many towns we find many people, they were poor people or slums were staying there, but suddenly there is a metro coming in. We find rich people coming there and taking over the land. So, and poor people getting replaced to the peri-urban areas. This kind of transitions have never been always smooth. Always it is contested. For example, what is happening in Mumbai around Dharavi being contested, what is happening around Ran of Kutch around solar panel is contested. So there are always contestation around the way land and land use changes. And while we have tried to address that through Land Acquisition Act, more recently, 2013, in Better Act called Land Acquisition, where we're talking about just, fair and compensation. So we're talking about social environmental impact assessment. But despite that, we see a lot of conflicts. And these conflicts are not only affecting communities who are poor, tribal, Dalit, women, it is also many times affecting the investment. For example, when an investment gets delayed, a land acquisition get delayed, a metro project get delayed, a solar energy project get delayed because of delay in land acquisition, because of these conflicts, because of this contestation, either on ground or in court, the investor or the financier also face a lot of cost. It could be interest outruns, it could be unviability, whether the project become unviable. So not only there are social and environmental risk for investment, there are also financial risk for investments because of land, which is hardly looked at. So this land-related conflict in India, there are a lot of figures around that. For example, in 2001, capital investment over 3% of India's GDP were stalled due to land acquisition problems. Land-related conflict in India impact investment worth 12 trillions, 12,000 billion rupees. So between 2000 and 2015, as per the CMI, the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy data, about 14% of the projects they were announced for infrastructure got stalled because of land-related conflict. So land-related conflict do affect, financial growth of the country substantially. Though sabke saath sabke vikas, it doesn't happen at the same time. Also, the financial aspirations get bottleneck. In 2020, 7 billion rupees worth of investments were affected due to land-related conflicts. In tribal areas, we call them fifth scheduled districts. So in that same year, there is another data set which talk about 2,300 billion rupees worth of investment. So there are a lot of different numbers going around. But what do they indicate? They indicate that when you change land use and land user, there is a tension, there is a reaction, which could be conflicts, which could be bloody battles, which could be prolonged court cases, which could affect populations, which could affect peace, law and order, also could affect financial investment. Globally, it was witnessed in a big scale during 2008, particularly when, due to subprime crisis in US, the global capital tried to move out of first world countries and people try to invest in agriculture land in developing countries, in global south, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. And during that time, it was called as global land grab, where global land were grabbed to make finance work for them. But these were lands of the poor people, local people, these big investors, they, connived with the these country leaders, elites, rich people, and it led to a lot of conflict. So during that time, it was realized that we need to have some responsible ways of investing in land, not only as per the state land laws, for example, the LAR RFC, LAR Act in India, but also some global investment frameworks which will address these tensions in a better way. And this is what we call land responsible investment framework. This is more important because your land laws in India also are pretty varied. I think in other sessions you would have heard about something called legal pluralism. India's land laws are pretty diverse. Though India land is a state subject in India, land acquisition acts are governed by the central act. States also have to enact it. You have scheduled areas, tribal areas where you find a different act works. Panchayats have different way of governing land. So there are total there are hierarchy of land, but how the forest land, how the common land, how the agriculture land, how the urban land are also governed are different. So where you have different land laws, and where you see that in many cases the land which are very rich in minerals, very rich in natural resources, and now also rich in solar light or for wind power, are located in areas where poor people live. So when these poor people need to be shifted, because this land has to be invested by big investors and taken, the land has taken away from these poor people, there has to be some kind of tension. And in many cases, in those lands, in these areas, like it could be Rann of Kutch, it could be Schedule 5 areas in the central Indian tribal belt, it could be schedule areas in northeast India, Schedule 6 areas, Article 371A in Nagaland. So in these areas, land records will be different, land laws will be different, the way common land will be different. So when you try to acquire those land, it always bring in a lot of resistance. In India, most of the land that have been acquired for development projects, be it hydropower, be it mining, be it for renewable energy, are common land. And many places, this common land and community tenure land are not very well recorded, very well mapped. So as a result of which, lot of conflict and tensions take place. So to address this conflict tension, to some way we look at law. And for example, this land acquisition law to some extent try to bring in this, particularly the LAR Act of 2013, talk about social and environmental impact assessment, talk about better compensation, just resettlement, talk about higher compensation, solatium. So a lot of things they try to do, and they try to ensure that through that these conflicts will be reduced. But to a great extent, we see still the conflicts continue, still the court cases continue. So in that context, in this session, I'll also share with you some global framework which can provide some extra legal approach to the corporates, to the land, to the investors who are investing in their land, to look at and see that how they can reduce the conflict. Because ultimately, if you really want a good growth, long-term growth, sustainable growth, resilient growth, the growth has to be inclusive. Like again, we call it Sabke Saath, Sabke Vikas. For that, we need to see how we address that, and this global framework, in a great way, can help in reducing this tenure risk for the business, and we call them little, unusual solutions. So there has been, post 2008 global land grab, a lot of international guidelines, performance standards, voluntary standards that call private sector. Like law can be brought in by the state and implemented, but private sector can also have lot. Just like nowadays we are talking about sustainability framework, we are talking about business ethics, where companies are voluntarily talking about going for net zero, carbon neutral. So they companies can also have voluntary standards, own standards, in addition to this state laws, so that they can reduce the conflict. So these guidelines call for companies to recognize, respect, and protect the land and resource rights of the local communities, indigenous people who hold some kind of rights which may be formal, informal, customary over this land and forest areas. And if you look at this framework, there are a lot of framework. I can give you some names. You can also Google it to see. Like one is, the most prominent one is this Food and Agriculture Organization. They are framework called Voluntary Guideline on Governance of Tenure, VGGT. So this is called Responsible Governance of Tenure of Land, Fisheries and Forest in the context of national food security. So it came as a response to mostly this global land grab in 2008. This VGGT came into effect in 2011. So VGGT talk about, this is the most prominent one, so let me spend some time talking about that, then go to others. So VGGT talk about how to respect legitimate land tenure rights of the local communities, respect and protect legitimate land and forest tenure rights held by these communities and the households. He talks about doing no harm to local and national food security, like where you take land for industry or for agriculture, commercial agriculture, how you don't affect negatively the local and national food security and environmental health, that must be taken care of. How the investment should support smallholders, how there should be free and prior informed consent while this investment is coming in, how there will be more consultation with local actors, how there will be more better, what do you call it, tenure due diligence. So when you try to take the land, how try to inquire who is the landowner, who is the land user, who is accessing the land, different times of the season, different time of the year. So how we look at all these land relations, how we document it, and how we try to address that in terms of compensation. That is more important. And it also talk about accountability, monitoring, and enforcement. Similarly, there are other this kind of performance standards, global guidelines, voluntary framework. So one of them is World Bank's, like most of them also part of the multilateral bilateral organized. Like World Bank has this, we call it EMSF, environmental and social framework, which talk about environmental social standards. IFC, International Finance Corporation, also talk about environment and social performance standards for guidance and the guidance notes. There is also UN Global Compact Food and Agribusiness Principles, which called UNFAB. USAID, United States Aid Agency, also talk about operational guideline for responsible land-based investment. So USAID has also their guideline. RRI, this Rights and Resource Initiative, they have also a interlinked responsible guideline. UNGP, this United Nations guiding principle for business and human rights, BHR. UNBHR has also the guiding principle, which also Government of India is now following. We'll talk about that. Then OECD countries also, they have guideline for multinational enterprises and equator principle. So these are some. You can also look at others. So all these guidelines have a common theme across them. What they try to do, they try to respect the local tenure. So what is the local tenure right? They respect that. Respecting and protecting the legal and not only legal right, also traditional, customary, informal rights to the land, especially of the vulnerable groups and indigenous communities. They all talk about community participation in the process of land acquisition, in the process of land appropriation, where whenever you want to acquire any land in those areas, you should go for what we call pre and prior informed consent of the local communities, engage stakeholders across consultations, and try to see that the processes that are followed are more transparent and accountable. A series of negotiations with the communities, assessing the social and environmental impact, talking about sharing that report with the communities, local government institutions, panchayats, village councils. Looking at that, the investment is sustainable and not leading to any environmental degradation also. And moreover, ensuring that in the process of acquisition, there is more equity and inclusion. So addressing historical injustice and ensuring fair access to resources. For example, there are different innovative tools. We call it land pooling. So there are different ways where local landholders are provided a more just, equitable, fair share in the proceeding, in the benefits that is coming out of the land acquisition, that is coming out when the land you changed. For example, a solar project coming in, how the solar project can share the benefit also with the local communities. So without depriving them, without doing injustice with them. So all this framework, they provide a foundation for ensuring that land-related investment remains socially responsive, environmentally sustainable, as well as economically inclusive. So this is one of the most important dimension, the way this framework try to address more responsible investment. So what has happened, once these voluntary guidelines came up, for example, FA was visibility, it was also discussed with many companies, and companies like Rio Tinto, Cargill, Illovo Sugar, Nestle, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Unilever, these people have also tried to adopt it voluntarily wherever they went for acquiring land in African countries, other countries. So similar kind of guidelines which is coming up, can also be taken up by Indian corporates, Indian investors, while they are trying to invest in land for business. So there are also parallelly some responsible business framework that Government of India has been working on. So since 2011, based on this United Nations guiding principles on business and human right, Government of India is trying to develop different guidelines. In 2011, they talk about National Voluntary Guideline on Socio-Economic and Environmental Responsible Business. 2018, they came up with something called NGRBC, National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct. And in November 2019, also SEBI mandated that there will be annual business responsibility reporting, that top 1,000 companies listed in SEBI should report as part of this NGRBC, this ABR, annual business responsibility reporting, respecting the principle of ESG, what we call environmental social governance. So what has happened now, this is the same thing since 2021, we call it BRSR, Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting. So BRSR is now compulsory for the companies to report, top 1,000 companies, and now also SEBI has come up that top 300 companies, their reports will be audited and checked. So as part of BRSR, also land responsible investment can be taken care of, because this BRSR also talk about social impact, and as part of principle 5 of the BRSR, which addresses human rights, companies can also disclose how they prevent adverse impact on land rights and livelihood of the local communities. And business can also describe how they are approaching, and respecting indigenous people's right, including customary land tenure system, particularly tribal and rural areas like Central Indian Tribal Belt, Northeast India. So BRSR provides some scope for focusing on land tenure. Similarly, BRSR talk about stakeholder engagement, just like the voluntary guidelines, how to engage with the stakeholders, how to go for free and prior informed consent, how to provide proper compensation and rehabilitation. So BRSR also talk about that. BRSR also talk about how to address risk and compliance around land-based investment, particularly how to address legal disputes related to land use, acquisition, and tenure, highlighting the potential operational risk. BRSR also talk about how to report RFCT LAR obligations, like Art Forest Right Act obligations. And BRSR also talk about sustainability, addressing sustainability goals, addressing ecological degradation along with land. So in a way, the land-based investment land responsible investment guidelines, which are globally coming up, now also getting internalized in India through this BRSR framework. And probably companies can look at, while they are trying to report BRSR, trying to address sustainability, trying to address net zero goals, and try to ensure business ethics, how they can integrate that, this land responsible investment principles, guidelines. So as this India's BRSR framework, the way it is internalizing the land responsible investment values, provides a lot of opportunities for Indian corporates to showcase their land responsibilities, how in their own investments. And particularly when we see in terms of natural climate solution, a lot of land will be required in India. As per one estimate of CEW, Center for Energy and Environmental Water, India would require 5 to 7% of its geographical area for transition to solar and wind, the targeted transition by 2070. And if we add hydro, this green hydrogen, so the estimate is going to 10%. So 10% of geographical area of India is more than 3 million hectares. So this land, when it will be going for renewable energy transition, it would require the investors to really value the indigenous communities, local communities, their tenure rights, involve them in the process of prior informed consent through consultations, and see that their interest and their risks are taken care of. So BRSR in that context can provide immensely powerful framework for the corporate investor to address it. So while they address BRSR, talk about their own sustainability reporting, and try to address net zero and ensure business ethics goals, I think addressing and adhering to land responsible framework values will provide them a lot of opportunities to go for more win-win solutions, like what we call Sabke Saath, Sabke Vikas. Thank you.